Hello everyone, my name is Cynthia Wanchu, and I'll be using this opportunity to do a cross-cultural comparison of whites, blacks, and Latins in the U.S., and it will be focusing on how they perceive and treat depression. Before we go any further, we must first have a well of an understanding of what depression is. WebMD describes depression as an intense, prolonged feeling of sadness that affects one's ability to function normally. So basically, depression is more than just being sad. It's more than the regular sad feeling that you get on a regular. It's more intense, and it's so intense that it can affect the way that you function on a daily basis. Symptoms of depression are appetite change, insomnia, impaired concentration, suicidal thoughts, irritability, loss of pleasure in life, and feeling of hopelessness. So you get the idea of how crippling depression can be. Possible causes of depression can be genetics, meaning it can go down the family line. It could also be social factors, meaning relationships that you can experience with others. Biochemical, which is, drugs that one person might put in their system that's not right. Trauma, which could be an experience such as a loss of a loved one or anything of that nature. Just to give you a few statistics, suicide is the result of depression in about 850,000 deaths per year. In addition, primary care physicians are less likely to detect depression in minorities than in whites, and you'll see why this stat is important as we go further down the presentation. So a research that I found on NIH.gov that I decided to analyze spoke on the perceived need for care among low-income immigrant and U.S.-born blacks and Latina women with depression. It compared these women with white low-income women with depression. One of the factors focused on in this research was Another factor focused on was somatization, which is how much their mental illness affected their bodies physically. And lastly, of course, their ethnicity, the origin of their group. The sample consisted of 1,577 low-income participants who were all women who met the criteria of depression and was an average age of 30 years old. Almost half of them were married or living with a partner, and about 35% of them did not complete high school. On average, the immigrants had been in the U.S. just over 8 years. 1.6% of the participants were U.S.-born Latina, 37.9% of them were immigrant Latina, 50.9% of them were U.S.-born Black, 3.1% of them were immigrant blacks, which included Africans and Caribbeans, and 6.5% of them was U.S.-born whites. The DSM-5 was used to diagnose them with depression. Their perceived need for care was assessed by yes or no questions. Questions such as, have you ever had enough emotional problems that you needed to seek help? The stigma-related concerns were assessed through questions such as, are you afraid to ask for help because you're afraid of what people will think about you? Participants were classified as somatizers if they reported 6 or more DSM-5 symptoms of somatization disorder. The results show that the minorities, especially the black immigrants, were far less likely to perceive the need for help for an emotional issue than white. The participants with stigma-related concerns such as being fearful of seeming as a disgrace, which were mainly the Africans and Caribbeans, were less likely to seek help. This fact is consistent with the findings that suggested that stigma and negative attitudes towards the mentally ill are somewhat more severe in Africans than Western cultures. Also, those that expressed fewer somatic complaints were more likely to refrain from seeking help. U.S.-born Latinas' results were more similar to the U.S.-born whites' results than they were to the blacks. In addition, most of the participants blamed their emotional state on external forces rather than internal forces. For example, women that reported that they were unhappy with their lives, especially in areas such as work or significant relationships, perceived these issues as the problem and not necessarily their current mood. In addition, participants were open to learning that their sadness could be helped. I decided to carry out a research of my own where I would examine what depression means to a person as an individual. The factors that was focused on was the age, ethnicity, and level of education. I used 15 convenient participants. 5 of them were Africans, 5 from Latin backgrounds, and 5 from a white background. The ages were between 19 and 63. I used a total of 3 females and 12 males. The participants' education varied from high school to trade school and to college education. The participants were asked to fill out a survey which included questions such as their geographical information, their understanding and views of depression, and how they felt was the best treatment for depression. I found that majority of the African participants saw depression more as a mind over matter issue and less intense than it really is. 40% of Africans and Latins saw depression as a sign of weakness, where only 20% of the whites did. 40% of the African participants believed that depression could be overcome on its own without any help from anyone. 100% of whites thought of therapy and drugs as the best option versus the 60% of Latins that thought so. Overall, very few of the participants that identified drugs as a possible treatment for depression, in which it is. Also, I noticed that higher educated participants identified depression as a psychological disorder more than lower educated participants. And those that identified depression as a psychological disorder were more likely to have more accurate responses to the other items. I also noticed that there was no significance in the age of participants and their views of depression. Here is the survey that I constructed to administer to my participants. As you can see, I asked questions such as, true or false, children cannot experience depression, just in order to see exactly how much they knew about depression. I also asked questions such as what it can lead to see how intense they felt like depression was. Keep in mind that I made it clear that they did not have to feel pressured into knowing the correct responses, and I wanted to know what they knew about it, not what they think they should know about it. Upon comparing the two studies, I noticed a few trends. I noticed that Africans are less likely to view depression as a serious mental illness. Whites have a better perception of depression, and whites have a better recognition of the help that is available for depression. I also noticed a difference that Latin views were more similar with the Africans than whites in my research than they were in the low-income women research. Based on the two researchers, I believe that it is safe to say that ethnicity it does have an essential factor in how depression is perceived and treated. Minorities' view of depression appears to be less threatening and severe than whites. Also, minorities are less likely to seek professional help for depression. I can also conclude that there are many other factors that affect the views of depression, such as the level of the education of someone and someone's personal beliefs. The findings in these research causes me to think that education could be the main difference in the way mental health is dealt with. Perhaps the answer to healthier mental health individuals is simply more education in mental health. This is definitely a topic that I would like to go further into. Doing this assignment has taught me a lot as far as being a researcher. I noticed that it's a lot less threatening than I imagined it to be. I also noticed that participants are more willing to participate than I expected. I just never thought that it would be so easy to come across as much participants as I did. In addition, I noticed that in order to conduct a good research, it will take a lot of trial and error, but it is all very much so worth it at the end. Overall, this was a great experience, and it was a good peek into what I can expect as I further my education. Thank you.